Hello, welcome to this 5-step video series on how to perform a Ninja Google Analytics MOT. My name's Tim, I'm Head Ninja at Exposure Ninja, and I'm going to be running you through a process that you can use to analyze the performance of your or any website in Google Analytics to tell how well it's doing, how well it's performing, and where it's getting its traffic from, and also identifying some opportunities to increase traffic and performance as well. Let's face it, Google Analytics gives us a ton of data, but one of the things that we hear most commonly from website owners and marketing managers is that they don't necessarily know where to look to get the insight from. All they see is loads of numbers. They don't really know what the different sections mean, where they should be looking to get insight. And also, when you see a number like a bounce rate, for example, how do you know if that's a good bounce rate or a bad bounce rate? How do you kind of benchmark that? It can be quite difficult because there are so many little bits of data. So in this video series, I'm going to give you some ballparks to work from, so you can measure your own site's performance, and I'm going to show you the process that we use when we're analyzing a site very quickly, so that you can start getting a handle on all of this stuff. Now, the 5-part MOT is broken into 5 separate videos. The first video, this one, we're going to be looking at some key metrics. So these are like the headline metrics that you're probably a little bit familiar with in Google Analytics. So I'm going to talk you through them and also give you some benchmarks so that you can start to understand how your site stacks up against competitors. In the next video, we're going to look in a bit more detail at conversion. So how your site's turning visitors into leads or sales. In the third video, we're going to look at traffic. So bit of a traffic overview and look at the different traffic sources available to us in Google Analytics. Then we're going to go into a bit more detail into one of these traffic sources and have a look and see what sort of metrics and insight it can give us. And then in the final video, we're going to look at device and how you can measure the performance of your site on desktop or mobile, and also how to identify opportunities in there as well. So let's go into key metrics, and I'm going to take you through some Google Analytics account live. So I'm going to show you this stuff live. Also, before we get started, I want to run you through something which I think might be quite useful. We actually built a tool called Analytics. Now, Analytics is a tool that allows you to, it synchronizes with your Google Analytics account and uses your Google Analytics account data to compare the performance of your site versus others in your industry. So we talked about how benchmarking can be quite tricky. How do you know what a bounce rate is, for example? Well, if you go to Analytics, you stick your email address in. If you click on grade your site now, what it's going to do is it's going to invite you to connect your Google Analytics account. And then when you do that, you're going to get a report which looks not dissimilar to this. So it'll grade you in a number of different areas. It'll give you an overall score as well. And then we will get a kind of headline stats for each different area. And then, of course, you can dive into a bit more detail. So it'll judge your analytics setup. Does it look like your tracking code is installed properly? Do you have conversions set up? It'll have a look at your website performance, how your search traffic's performing, how pay-per-click traffic is performing. So here you can see we're analyzing exposureninja.com. We don't actually do that much PPC for ourselves, so we're not doing as well as we could do here. And the same with social. And it will show you how you're doing on mobile as well. And then each section has a number of different metrics which it'll judge you on. So here under website performance, you can see it's benchmarking our site against other sites in our industry, having a look at average competitor bounce rate, for example, session duration, a number of pages per session, whether we got conversion tracking installed, and then how many conversions we're actually getting per month, and also conversion rate as well. So quite interesting to see how others in your sort of business are doing. So that's analytics.exposureninja.com. That's analytics. So it's basically analytics with an O. And then if you go and stick your site in there, it's going to give you this nice report. And the other thing it'll do is it'll give you some recommendations based on your results as well. And if you need any help, then you can just click Get Help Now and it'll come through to us. So I hope you find the Analytics tool useful. Anyway, we're going to be looking at key metrics inside Google Analytics itself. So when we're doing this, the first thing that we want to do is we want to go to acquisition, and then we're going to expand all traffic and go to channels. So this is the kind of first place that we look when we open a Google Analytics account. And you want a bit of data to look at here. So it depends on the amount of traffic that you're getting, but we normally look at between 6 weeks and 3 months as a bit of a kind of starting point here. So you don't want to just be looking at a week or something like that. If you look at the day level, then you can see how things change with weekends and stuff if there's a lot of fluctuation, and you might want to go for week or month. So what we're looking at in this screen is we're looking at the amount of traffic coming through to the site, or the number of visits to your site. And then in this table, we're looking at the different traffic channels, and then we've got a whole bunch of different metrics here. So what I'm going to do is very quickly talk through these different metrics. And then in the next video, we're going to dive into this section, the conversions, in a bit more detail. So the first thing that we're looking at in this table down here, this first column is acquisition. So this is the visits that are coming through to the site. This is the number of people. So for example, here we can see organic search. So this is traffic that's coming through SEO, so coming through Google organically. And we can see the number of sessions, which means the number of visits. So a session is someone coming onto the site. Now, if they come back next day or they come back later that day, that counts as another session, right? As long as they come back within half an hour of the original session, that's a new session. So this is the total number of visits. Some of them will be repeat visits, some of them will be brand new visits. We can see the percentage of new sessions, so the percentage of first time sessions here in this column, and we can see the number of new users, so the number of kind of individual devices, if you like, that have been on the site. In this behavior column, we can see what's actually happening with this traffic. So bounce rate is probably one of the most misunderstood and most confusing metrics, I think, of Google Analytics. It doesn't really relate to much that we experience in everyday life. Now, a bounce is a single page session. So that means someone has come onto the site, they've spent some time on one page, and then they've left without clicking on any other pages or without triggering any other events. So a couple of typical scenarios which would be considered a bounce. Let's say someone clicks on your website from Google. It takes a little while to load. They're getting a bit impatient. The thing that loads isn't very pretty, so they immediately leave and they go back to Google and they look for something else. That will be considered a bounce because they saw one page, or they tried to load one page and they didn't see any other pages on your site. They didn't trigger any other events, and then they left. So that is a bounce. Another type of bounce would be someone coming to your site, reading a blog post. So that, let's say they see a blog post on Google or on social media. They spend 10 minutes reading that blog post and then they leave without taking any other action. This would also be considered a bounce because they didn't go on any other pages. So that might feel a little bit harsh. Well, you think I should be credited something for that visit. Yes, but they're really still considered a bounce. So the bounce rate is the percentage of single page visits on your site. And I'll give you some approximate metrics in just a minute. Then we've got pages per session. So this is pretty self-explanatory. The number of pages on average that are viewed per session. So every time someone comes on the site, on average, how many pages that they visit. And then we've got average session duration. So how long are people spending on the site? Now, an important thing to note about average session duration is if somebody bounces, then their average session duration is logged as 0. Okay, so even if they spent 10 minutes viewing your blog post, if they didn't see any other pages, then your average session duration for that visit is 0. So that's something to bear in mind. So this metric is actually kind of, I guess it's skewed a bit low because particularly if you've got a high bounce rate, then your average session duration is going to be quite a lot higher. The conversion side of things we'll cover in the next video, but basically the conversion defines, how this section is one of the most important areas. This is really how well your site is actually performing with the traffic that it's getting. Before we go into the next video, I just want to talk through some kind of typical numbers for this section here under behavior. So bounce rate is one of those where it can vary wildly depending on the type of traffic that you're getting and where people are going on your site. Usually, and we have access to hundreds of Google Analytics accounts, and obviously with Analytics we get to see all the data behind the scenes there as well. So usually bounce rate is between 40 and 50%. It really depends on traffic channels. So for example, if you're getting a lot of traffic from SEO, then your bounce rate might be slightly lower. But if you're getting a lot of traffic to blog posts, then your bounce rate can be quite a lot higher, because what happens with a blog post, let's say that you're a plumber and you've got a blog post on most common boiler problems in winter. Well, if someone lands on that blog post and they start reading about most common boiler problems in winter, that's an informational searcher, isn't it? So it's the likelihood that they'll actually need a plumber. Some of them will, of course, which is why you've written a blog post, but not everyone will. So you're going to have a higher bounce rate on blog posts, and it's not uncommon to see blog posts which are bouncing at 60, 70%. So obviously, if you're getting a lot of your traffic through blog posts, then that's going to skew your bounce rate slightly higher. And if you have a site which gets a lot of blog traffic, then your bounce rate could easily go up to 55, 60, even higher than that, like 65%. If your bounce rate is higher than that, or if your bounce rate is higher than, say, 55%, and you don't have a lot of blog posts, that would be a cause for, not concern, but just take a look at what's going on there. Because if you're getting a lot of traffic to your site, but it's leaving without doing anything, it's not generally a good thing. Same with pay-per-click. Now, pay-per-click, yeah, again, it can have a higher bounce rate than organic, and we'll get a bit more into this in video 3. But if your bounce rate for pay-per-click is above, say, 75% or so, then you kind of want to think, well, actually, how many of these clicks do we want to be letting go? So those are some kind of good metrics for bounce rate. Now, pages per session, again, it can depend on the type of site you run, but normally we'd start to get concerned if pages per session was lower than, say, 1.5 across all of your channels. And average session duration, we'd normally start to get a bit concerned if average session duration was less than a minute and a half. Okay. Now, on this site, you'll see that there's actually a bit of an anomaly here, in that the referral traffic here has a huge conversion rate and is responsible for a large percentage of all the conversions that come through to the site. This is a bit of an anomaly, and it's caused by us using third party for our review forms. So because we use type forms for our marketing review, what happens is when you submit a marketing review form, you actually get redirected through a type form URL, which means that that review ends up being logged as a referral conversion. So you get slightly skewed metrics here. So what's basically happened is those review leads, those conversions have been taken from these other traffic channels, and they're showing under referral. There is a solution called cross-domain traffic tracking, but for some reason the plumber's pipes always leak, and we haven't done it for our own site. Classic. It's one of the first things we'd fix on a client site, obviously, but for whatever reason, it's not done here. Anyway, hope that's a good overview of the key metrics. In the next session, we're going to look under conversion and go into a bit more detail there.